Hi, my name is David Terr, and welcome to my new channel, Let's Make a Better World. This is my political channel, which I just started. This is my first video on this channel. And today I'm going to talk about the political spectrum, which we'll talk about for a few minutes, but then I'll actually show you that it's not really that accurate. It's a little bit of a misnomer. But let's just start with the basics. So, this is what I think people are familiar with. We call this political spectrum. We talk about people on the left and people on the right. So left is basically liberal and right is conservative, and there's kind of a spectrum of different values in between. People in the center are called moderate, and I think we know what this means. Liberals are just kind of progressive people who like to see positive change in the world. Conservatives are people who rather maintain the status quo, and you can become more extreme on either end. And notice on the bottom they both say radical. So radicals are extremists. They're the ones who kind of want to either go extreme left or extreme right, and we'll see there really isn't that much of a big difference between these extremes. So I think this whole notion of a one-dimensional spectrum is a little bit inaccurate. But anyway, this is just a little bit finer breakdown here. So we actually have names for the extremes. The extreme left would be like socialist or communist, and extreme right would be fascist. And these are both totalitarian regimes. So in some ways, they're not really that much different, although their focus is different. But anyway, yeah, and this is just kind of where people lie on this spectrum. I don't know where this survey applies to. I'm pretty sure it's the United States. Um, so it looks like about 6% of all Americans are on the far left, progressive left, about 10% on the far right. They're called faith and flag conservatives, and you can see the different names for these. And these get a little bit interesting, so let's just go through them. So next to progressive left, you got establishment liberals. They're ones. So progressive left, these are sort of anti-establishment people who are really not happy with the status quo and they want to see major changes in our society. I think I'm one of these guys. And then next to that, you got establishment liberals. They're liberal. They like to see change, but they'd like to see it work within the system, within the establishment. They don't want a revolution or anything. They just want our government to work the way it's supposed to. And then you got Democratic mainstays, or just kind of Democrats by name. They don't not really all that interested in politics, but they call themselves Democrats. And then you got outsider left. Then you got people who really don't like the Democratic Party. And there are a lot of people. Notice that in this diagram, the people in the middle here really don't consider themselves either Democrats or Republicans. So these outsider lefts, they're also kind of liberal, but they don't consider themselves Democrats. And then you've got stressed sideliners. These are, I guess, the moderates who really don't like either party, and they're kind of stressed because they know things aren't working right, but they're not really sure what to do about it. Then you got ambivalent right. These are people who consider themselves more conservative, but they're kind of ambivalent. Ambivalent, they just figure it makes more sense to be on the right. And then you got the populist right, these are just kind of the people on the right who just, I guess, fit in with a general population and um, decide to maintain the status quo because I guess that's what their friends are doing or that's what they think is right. Then you've got people further on the right, committed conservatives. They are committed to their views and they're not really yielding. And then on the far right, you got faith and flag conservatives. Those would be kind of the extreme right people, I guess. Trump supporters, people like that, who just are very extreme on the right wing views. So anyway, that's kind of where people stand in the United States, and this is a little more. Notice that now in this diagram, we have Democrats and Republicans in the middle, and I guess most people in the United States are kind of in the middle. I mean, most Americans consider themselves either Democrats or Republicans. We've had a two-party system in the United States for over 100 years now, I guess ever since Lincoln, so I guess 150 years or so. And then if you go further away from Democrats, then you've got people on the extreme left, and they want dictatorship. I guess this would be communist dictatorship like Stalin. And on extreme right, you've got fascist dictatorship. That would be like Hitler. And this is kind of how the world was, I think, in the 1930s. I mean, America was in the middle, but, of course, you had Nazi Germany on the far right, and you had the Soviet Union on the far left. And I think most Americans agreed that neither of these extremes were good. And so obviously during World War II, fascist countries became our enemies, and I think most Americans didn't like the Soviet Union either, even though we were allied with them in World War II. But that was mainly just to fight Hitler and his attempt to create a master race and rule the world. Obviously, nobody wanted that. So, anyway, so what am I getting at here? I guess what I'm getting at is that this political spectrum I started talking about is more like a circle, if you think about it. I mean, if you start, and your moderate is people in the middle, but then if you go to the left, you got liberals, and then you keep going, you got radicals, socialism, communism, and things are getting very extreme. And according to this diagram, if you go to the far extreme of that, you get anarchy. I mean, it just doesn't work. At some point, the whole system breaks down, and you no longer have a government. It's just anarchy. Just every. So anyway, if you go on the right, it's kind of the same thing. You start with, just mild conservatives, and then you got reactionaries, and then you got fascists, and then they have what they call Nazism, which I guess is extreme fascism. And if you keep going in that direction, again, you end up in anarchy. So I mean, there's something kind of wrong, I think, with a sort of one-dimensional picture. It kind of wraps around a circle, but I think there's actually more going on. I think the one-dimensional depiction of where people's political views are isn't quite right, and it's probably better to go to two dimensions. And if you look at this diagram, I think this one's really interesting because there's actually two axes on here. There's the vertical axis, which well, I guess yeah, it's better to look at the things on the edge. So the bottom of this diagram says cultural focus on the individual, and the top of the opposite has cultural focus on community. So I guess cultural focus on the individual would be like more like the United States, every man for himself kind of attitude, where the individual counts. And then community, I guess the top would be more like communism. But then you've also got economic focus on the left and right, and I think most Americans are kind of on the right on this side because they like economic focus on the individual. We're a very individualistic society here, and people want to, they call America the land of opportunity, which means we have upward mobility, which means that if people work hard or get lucky, they can become rich. That's kind of the American dream. And if you look at the left, you got economic focus on community. That's kind of the opposite of that. That's socialism, basically. That's saying that the government should provide for everybody. Everybody should have all the basic needs, and there should be limits on wealth and income, and basically kind of flattens out, our wealth. I guess I'm sort of leaning in this direction myself. But now, if you look at these two axes together, you get a two-dimensional picture. And if you have like cultural focus on the individual and economic focus on the individual, you end up in the lower right corner, which is individualism, which is kind of what most Americans are, I think. But if you want economic focus on the community, like I mentioned, I kind of I think, obviously the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer right now. And I think there's too much division between rich and poor. That's why I consider myself more on the left in this diagram. But at the same time, I like the idea of cultural focus on the individual. I don't want to be, just another drone in society and have my life dictated how I'm supposed to live. So I guess that makes me a leftist. So leftists like cultural focus on the individual, basically individual having the right to, live how he wants, but still have his economics, his wealth limited. That's what I consider myself. But then if you go the opposite direction, cultural focus on community, that's more like socialism, communism. But then you got economic focus on the individual. Then you got rightism. I mean, so people want to get as rich as they can. that puts them on the right, but they also want cultural focus on community, which means that people really can't do that much as individuals. That's pretty far right, I think. I guess if you went extreme in that direction, you'd end up with fascism. But now, if you look at the top left, you got economic focus on community and cultural focus on community. That's called communitarianism, and I don't like that either. I mean, that really has practically no. The individual has really no significant role in this kind of society. It's basically a dictatorship, and I don't like that. That's more like the Soviet Union. So anyway, I think that's a little bit of a better picture of what's going on. Here's another 2D diagram, a little more detailed, but same idea. This one's actually turned about 45 degrees from the other one. Notice you have the left on the left and the right on the right, whereas in this one you have the left and the lower left and the right and the upper right. So if you kind of turn this picture 45 degrees clockwise, you end up with this picture. And notice on the bottom now you got libertarianism. On the bottom, that's basically no government. And then on the top, you got authoritarianism, which is basically totalitarianism. And like I said, I think I'm kind of in the lower left on this diagram. I don't like the idea of government having too much power, but on the other hand, well, I guess economic power, but not political power. I guess that puts me on the left in this diagram. And you can add more dimensions if you want. Then things get really complicated. And this is a three-dimensional picture. This is the last one I'm going to talk about here. Here you got three axes. So you still have a up-down axis, the z-axis, if you like. Libertarianism, now they put it on top, and totalitarianism on the bottom. It's basically how much the government should control things. And then on the left and the right, you've got individualism now on the right. I think they turned things around here. Collectivism on the left. So those were the two axes I talked about on the other 2D diagrams. But now you have a third axis, which is progressivism. If you go further back in the Y direction, I guess, and you got conservatism if you go towards you. And remember what progressivism and conservatism about. Progressivism just means you like to see positive change. Conservatism means you like the status quo. So this is kind of an interesting diagram, but it's much more complicated to work with. I kind of like the 2D diagrams the best. But all of this is kind of a simplification anyway. And it's not really, I don't think that people's political views are as simple as, one, two, or even three dimensions. I think, it is a simplification, but I think it's a useful one. And anyway, that's my talk on the political spectrum. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.